This is the spoiler discussion and review of the 10th and final book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, The Crippled God. If you don't want spoilers, click the review above. Otherwise, let's go. Spoiler review of The Crippled God. Let me say from the start, I have been hesitant to say this on some of my other reviews until I knew the entirety of the series. I can say now with absolute confidence, the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson is my favorite fantasy ever written, and I think even more than that, I think it has a say as an objectively best fantasy of all time. It deserves its place with Tolkien and Robert Jordan in Wheel of Time as being just like the best of all time. I love this series. Truly find it enlightening, challenging, creative, brilliantly written, philosophical, unique, a truly epic, fantastic series, and this is one of the best endings to fantasy as well of all time. I was nervous how this was going to be finished and how the various threads of the story that we have from all the other books could combine to a satisfactory ending, and I absolutely thought Erikson did. This is a tremendous work, has some of the best battle sequences of the whole series, which is truly saying something, and it's just completely engrossing from start to end. By the end of it, I was emotionally wrung out in the best possible way. I was both elated and destroyed emotionally. I was exhausted. So good. I'm going to say at the outset here, obviously in one spoiler review, I can't say everything I'd want to say about this. Luckily for The Crippled God, I actually did a video vlog of my entire read through. So I almost go chapter by chapter through my thoughts on this. So if you want to see my in-depth thoughts on this book, click above for the playlist of that. And I think there's 20 episodes of me going through almost chapter by chapter. So check that out. I'm able to get in much more detail there, obviously. And I don't know the ending, so I'm sort of slowly putting things together. So I think that'll be very enjoyable. So be sure to check that out. All right, let's get into the plot overview of the book itself. We pick up right where we left off in Dust of Dreams. Dust of Dreams is really the only cliffhanger we have in the Malazan Book of the Fallen after the battle with the Naruk. We don't know how depleted the Bone Hunters are, who has survived, if anyone, and how the overall story is going to take off from there. And Erikson actually leaves us on that cliff hanging on for a little while, probably the first 100 or so pages, as we are caught up with some of the other storylines. Especially it sets up the Forkless Sail, which up to this point have had very little to do with the overall thrust of the series, but now we see here at the end that they are indeed going to be the climax. And the Forkless Sail are just incredibly creative in how they look, double jointedness, and their philosophy really of the need for justice. And it's this perverted view of justice that strives for them to destroy humanity as a whole. And that's a big theme in this work overall, is sort of the sins of humanity coming back upon itself. And that's really personified in the Forkless Sail and their ideas of justice, sort of a fundamentalist view of justice. But eventually we are brought back to both the K'chain Shamal of Stormy and Gessler and the Bone Hunters themselves, who are alive, although they are heavily depleted. I think actually the numbers are mentioned that somewhere under 1,000 people are left in the army. The soldiers are truly changed from that experience of that battle. After we pick up with them, we are given really a tragedy march through the Glass Desert, where a ton of people are dying, a ton of soldiers are losing heart, especially Blistig is starting to sort of lose his mind and potentially start a mutiny. At this point, we don't know what the plan is. We still have sort of kept the ultimate goal of this army from us until that last moment of desperation in the Glass Desert. When they are about to die, they march for one more day and they get to this basin, or it used to be a basin. It's dry now because it's in the middle of the desert. One very key thing we learned that I think is, again, an incredibly beautiful and awful metaphor is that the Forkless Sail, their view of justice is so fundamentalist that it can't even square itself with the god that they worship, and so they actually killed their own god with their viewpoint of justice. It is the remnants of that god that the Forkulasail killed that has created the glass desert. And it's actually a divers of the moths and bugs and butterflies that have been referenced all throughout Dust of Dreams and the beginning of this work, is one single divers of this god who is like destroying everything because of what the Forkulasail did. So even like the physical surroundings in this book is crying out for perverted justice, and that is what is the real enemy for the first like half of this book as the bone hunters struggle through the glass desert, as well as, remember, the snake, children who are wandering from the Kolanzi area who have been suffering from the Forkulasail are also suffering through this. So we find out all of this suffering, again, comes back to the Forkulasail and this perverted view of justice. These two forces actually do eventually come together in this beautiful moment that I'll talk a lot about later, where instead of the bone hunters turning away these children, they take them under their wing. Even though they don't have the water or the food to supply these extra people, they have mercy and compassion, ding ding ding, on these children. I'll talk more about that later, just to say now that it is a fantastically amazing moment in this work. At the end of this terrible march, there is revealed, way back in Dust of Dreams, we were reminded we're given this sort of dagger by Mael. They reach this basin and she's able to use her blood as a sacrifice to actually bring water up into this old basin, I assume using the power of Mael. And it was supposed to be used in a moment of last desperation, so it's unclear to me if it's because they had to march all the way to the basin or merely because they truly had to be that desperate for the power and the magic to work to bring that water. Either way, even though they're bridge burners, a lot of people die in the desert, they are actually able to come to this area and get water and survive and go on for another march. Also, after this, we are given sort of the war councils where we are revealed that the ultimate end of this is to release the crippled god. And actually the bone hunters this whole time have been fighting to free, and this includes plots from Shadow Throne and Cotillion and Hood and even Anomander Rake way back in Toll of the Hounds. All of this is around the idea that the injustices that have been placed upon the crippled god and that as retribution he has put on the rest of the world needs to be looked at through this lens of compassion, and they need to free the crippled god from his chains and allow him to return home. And this is such a profound and bold move by Erikson. I'm going to talk a lot about this in the themes section, but it bowls you over when you think of it and when you read it, because the level of awfulness that the crippled god has been, for this to be the ending and the climax being to save this despicable man, remember, who's been in this tent, has caused all this terrible things with the Tisti Dur, just like all everything he has done. Again, I need to talk about this later, so I'll move on, but is a tremendous plot twist, if you want to call it that, to reduce it to that, in the Malazan Book of the Fallen as a whole. Tremendous. And we found out later on in the book that actually the Malazan Book of the Fallen is actually written by the crippled god. So the whole time that I've been reading this series, I thought the name of this final book was because they are going to defeat the crippled god in this final chapter, but it's the opposite, actually. We find out in this final tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen that, in fact, they are fighting to free this man from his pain, or this god from his pain. Amazing. After all this stuff with the Glass Desert, happening concurrently is all the drama that is happening in Karkanos, because you remember the Sheikh were there at the end of Dust of Dreams, and I have to say right out of the bat that this storyline up unto the crippled god I did not like. I thought the Sheikh as a whole were kind of weird. I didn't like all the witches, even like down to the way they talked. I thought was confusing at times. Jan or Twilight and Yadan I just didn't find incredibly compelling. I thought it was distracting from other storylines, especially with the Malazan army, that I was much more interested in. So I freely admit my error there, because in this book, it is an incredible finale of what happens in Karkanos. It brings back together what happened in Toll the Hounds with Nymander and the rest of the Tistan D, and that they have left Black Coral to return to their homeland. It brings in Mother Dark finally being back and giving power and life to that area. And more than anything, the fight on the first shore with the Sheikh and those Lethiri that are now part of the Sheikh battling against the Tisleosin is epic in the highest possible sense. It is a incredibly emotional journey. It is one of the best fight and battle scenes in the entire work. Erikson gives such depth to the Tisleosin that we've seen them hardly at all in other books. We've seen obviously glimpses, but like nothing complex until we get to this work, and you understand their side of things as well, but also you are so taken with the heart of holding this small breach. Throw into that Yadan being a complete badass, the husk sword that laughs as it kills, including killing dragons, and the way that battle is described and how Yadan initially dies. The discussions and actions of Pithy and Brevity, who to this point have been sort of like silly, almost comic relief, and then to really have your heart pulled out when Pithy dies and Brevity's newfound like respect and passion. I mean, it is an incredible storyline. I love it so much, and it got me so hyped for the Karkonos trilogy, because this is obviously an extension of a hundreds of thousands of year war is happening, and this sort of climax of taking back Karkonos is unbelievable, tinged a little bit with a couple of very sad storylines about what depression and the weight of expectation and personal grief can do to people, both through the viewpoints of Calor from the side of the Tisleosin. We get a little story of him, as well as obviously with Sanderloth, Drew Corlott, really turning into a captive in her own mind because of the pressure and the things that have happened to her throughout her life and existence as a spirit. So those are very, very sad moments, but as a whole, that whole storyline is incredible. Yadan's death, the hands of a dragon. Oh man, this whole storyline, I'm not going to say much more about it in this review, but just know it's tremendous, it's amazing, and on rereads, I'm really excited to know that when I'm reading about these characters earlier, when previously I had not appreciated that. Another storyline going on in the background of this book the whole time is the Shurk voyage with Felash and her handmaiden, and then eventually Hood himself. I love Hood as a character. I said way back in, I liked his entrance in Toll the Hounds. I think he was given a lot of really good backstory by Dead Smell's backstory in Dust of Dreams, and then the part he plays in The Crippled God I find equally interesting and astounding and well done. I love his discussion about death with Shurk, this very obvious kind of on-the-nose discussion between someone who is undead and should be dead and the god of death or previous god of death. I think it's fascinating. Felash I like for the most part. She doesn't get a ton to do, really, in the whole scheme of things, but it's an interesting thing. Her handmaiden is much more interesting, especially the reveal that it's a Segula without the mask. I think that's really cool. I want some more backstory on that. I'm not sure if I'm going to get it. The whole Volcando empire, I should say kingdom, that is part of these last two books in Dust of Dreams, I think is a great addition. Queen Abersol is very interesting, and Gax, of course. Like, all of that working together, I really, really enjoy. And also that they're not given too much time to distract from the larger stories that we're in. So I just wanted to mention it because one of my favorite moments of this book is when Hood literally bites the face off of a Forkla sail, and that happens during that journey. In the background, everything happening with the Malazans, and on the first shore, there is a fight going on in the Pantheon between Ascendants or New Gods and the Elder Gods, with the exception of Mael and K-Rule and a couple others who are not really part of this. Someone like Kilimandros, as well as obviously the Master of the Hold and Knuckles and a couple of other forces are trying to regain their former power, and their plan revolves around freeing the Otaratel dragon Korobas, and they do this. Otaratel, or Korobas, basically is the opposite of magic. It steals life, and so having this huge dragon that is made of this free in the world just like slashes through Earth and just brings death wherever it goes, and it's drawn to Otaratel wherever it's given. And this is going to be a big point towards the end of the work. Also as part of this is Ikariam, who is at this point sleeping after one of his rages, and he is a potential player in this whole drama. This really brings me to the ending. I know I'm skipping some stuff, but there's so much good stuff in this work, I have to streamline as much as I can. There's really 3 climaxes in this book. Like the last, 400 pages are all like climax after climax after climax, and all of them are tremendous. So I have to talk about 3 of them. So, as I said before, the main focus of this work is to free the crippled god. They have to do 3 things to do that. First, they have to get the heart of the crippled god. His physical heart is manifested in this place called the Spire, which is in the Bay of Colanzi, where the Forcalasail have set up their domain. There's a literal heart that is chained there that they need to recover. Secondly, they need to bring this heart to a place called the altar. This is a place in the middle of the glass desert where there is a amount of power that will allow the crippled god to take physical form. Remember, this always takes some sort of deep magic for that to happen with a god, and they need to reunite the heart with the physical form of the crippled god. And then the third one, they actually need to release him from chains. Remember, he's the chained god. He's been chained here by the gods of old, and they are feeding on his power, which is part of the suffering that he has partaken in. So once they do that, he can leave this earth and return home to his followers. So first, the Spire. The plan here is the K'chain Chamal, led by Stormy and Gessler, are going to lead an army to overtake this Spire and get this heart of the crippled god. They are helped by Tool and the Talan Emas, which is a big part of this book that I haven't mentioned. That Tool is obviously stripped of basically all his humanity, for lack of a better word, or his personhood, because of the awful horror of what happened to Heitan, and he is now just filled with wrath. But at his core, he is loyal, and he's actually loyal to the Malazan Empire. And so there's this really touching scene between him and Stormy and Gessler where they talk about their loyalties and what they are fighting for and why they are fighting for that thing. And so the Talan Emas actually are eventually going to fight with the K'chain Chamal at the Spire. And this brings into play all of the elder race, founding races, the Forcalasail, obviously the enemy, and then the K'chain Chamal, the Emas, or now the Talan Emas, and then eventually even Jaggets are going to be involved in this final destructive battle to really save the Earth. Because we should say that the Earth is in jeopardy for a lot of different ways. One, the Forcalasail are trying to take the power from the heart of the crippled god so that they are able to open their warren completely on the world, and this will destroy the world as a whole. The other possible thing that can destroy us is the Untitled Dragon, which can destroy the Earth, because like I said, it's like the opposite of magic. Also, you can, if they kill the Untitled Dragon, that is kind of like the anchor, so to speak, on the ship of magic, to use a metaphor. And so if that's dead, magic is going to leave the Earth. We don't really know what that means, but that seems to be the reference as I understand it. The other possibility is that to deal with the Untitled Dragon, Tiam might be the god of dragons, the mother of dragons might be brought to Earth and manifest, and then she is just this force of chaos that will destroy everything. So all these forces are potentially destroying everything. The stakes could not be bigger in this book. Anyway, back to the Spire. The K'chain Chamal and their army attack the Colanzi, who have fortified the Spire, obviously all the way up there, as they are trying to take the heart's power. Oh, this is an incredibly epic finale. So what ends up happening is the K'chain Chamal are fighting this incredible battle from trench to trench to trench, because this is an entrenched position. The Colanzi are fighting with inhuman determination because the Forcalasail's power is in the voice, and they brainwash these hundreds of thousands of troops. There's this extremely bloody battle happening, and at the same time, Sin, if you remember, the child is basically, her humanity has been burned out, so her fire is destroying everyone. Also, while this is happening, Hood arrives with Felash and Shurk in the bay, and he, with his Jagged Warren, releases Omtos Philak, and it causes the bay to freeze and actually lift up the ships so that Hood himself can get closer to the Spire as he starts to head towards this final confrontation. At the same time, either Stormy or Gessler, I forget which one, is through his prayers just kind of automatically calling to the god Fenrir, the boar god, who manifests in the sky via a cloud of smoke and 2 burning suns for eyes as he's going to take place in this. But at the same time, Karsa Orlong, way back in Darujistan, finally follows through on the prophecies and promises he has made to kill a god because he kills Fenrir. When Fenrir is killed, which I think was his plan the whole time, his body erupts in raining blood. But because it's the blood of a god, this rain brings life to that which was dead, which includes the Talan en masse right as they are going into battle. As Tool says, this is ill-timed because now they're used to fighting where it doesn't matter with their flesh, but now they are true flesh and blood. It also brings true flesh and blood to Hood, the god of death, who's now like a living Jagged. It is an unfathomable amount of epicness happening at the same time. Eventually, Sin kills the final Forkal Assail, and she is about to take the power of the fallen god herself when she is defeated by Stormy and Gessler working together. Unfortunately, both of them fall in one of the most heart-wrenching of deaths because they were some of our favorites of all time. Oh, R.I.P. Stormy and Gessler, especially because they give their life at the very end for the dog Grub, which has been foreshadowed in kind of silly ways all throughout. The Forkal Assail is going to kill the dog, and I think it's Stormy who gives his life basically so that the dog can live before he is killed. But they buy enough time through their sacrifice for Hood to arrive at just the final moment. And as someone who has seen all the justice of the Forkal Assail, because he has to bring in all the dead that they have killed, he has this great moment where he grabs the highest leveled Forkal Assail, smashes her on the ground over and over again and says, "I have had enough of your justice," and kills her. A K'chain Shamal, one of the flying ones, I forget the actual name of that, actually takes the heart of the crippled god and then goes to bring it to the altar. So the Spire has been won. They have the heart of the crippled god, but of course that is only like a third or maybe not even that much of the battle. The Bone Hunters have divided into 2 separate groups. The regular army is going to fight the bulk of the Kolan's forces that are coming for them and try to delay them as long as they can, because the special troops are going straight to the altar. They are led by Fiddler and Hedge with his new bridge burners to defend the body of the crippled god while they try to destroy the chains. So those 2 are dividing amongst themselves. At the same time, also trying to buy time is the Letheri and Volcando people and armies who are fighting elsewhere in Kolanzi again to keep people from coming and destroying the crippled god. So that storyline is incredibly satisfying because the payoff of Briss Benedict's long storyline of he was dead and now came back. If you remember, Erikson talks a lot about he has all these names in his head and he's sort of haunted by these old gods from the past. And again, in a ironic turn of force, when one of the most powerful Forkal Assail tried to attack and kill Briss in the heat of battle, Briss is able to use the power of the voice of the Forkal Assail against them by speaking all of the names of these gods and basically rebounding the strength of the Forkal Assail's voice back upon himself, and that kills him. And that allows the Letheri forces and the Volcando forces to prevail in that battle. And Briss barely escapes death because of the Atrocida's heroism. And so they are able to live, and they have this really strong love story. And actually, I very much liked their relationship as a whole in this book. It's not really dwelt on because there's just too much, but in the background, we have enough information to understand how they learn to care and love for each other. This is where I need to step back a moment and talk about the Malazan Host, because they're also a big part of this army, of this conflict. The Malazan Host is the host that is under the control of Ganos Perrin. He has been actually on this continent for a lot of the story, but we just haven't known about them. They actually landed on the other side of the coast and have been besieging and taking over parts of Kolanzi slowly and surely. And it's great to see in this work Perrin's evolution as a character. He first starts as this really, cocky, young, wanting to prove himself commander. He turns into sort of this world-weary commander of the bridge burner who steadily, sort of begrudgingly earns their respect as one of their greatest captains ever. And then, of course, he starts having these master of the deck experiences and fights against that and becomes sort of like physically ill. And now we see him sort of at the end of that road, really turning into sort of a demigod ascendant. And he uses his power to propel the force that used to be one-armed Dujeks into this really amazing force to help this conflict on the Lothari continent. He kills many Forkula Sail. Eventually, Quickben and Kalam, like they used to do way back in Curtains of the Moon, have like this buddy relationship and start to really affect fights by killing Forkula Sail specifically. And when they die, they sort of lose the strong control they have over their armies, and so that allows the host to be very effective in fighting. I go back and mention this because the host resolves several things. First, resolves very well the fight with the Greyhelms. That was a big part of Dust of Dreams. I didn't want to go over it too much in this review. It's very, I think, well written and fascinating, but it's just sort of in the background of everything else that happens. But the host defeats them in a battle in a really, really well done chapter. As I said, there's like 3 great battles in this, and that's one of them. They actually are the ones to come and save the day in the final conflict, where the Malazan main forces almost are completely destroyed, but is saved at the last moment by the host and Ganos Perrin, and especially his ability to use Warrens by being master of the deck. And so he's able to save them and travel long distances, and that is sort of the thing that allows for victory. And the reunion between the two Perrins, Ganos and Tavor, is beautiful. Tavor collapses in Ganos' arms, and it's just beautiful. There's so much in that embrace, in that moment. It is so touching. They actually do get to meet. So good. But this isn't over yet, because way back at the altar, there is this incredible fight between the new bridge burners and Fiddler's crew and the elites of the Kolanzi and Forkula Sail forces. Alright, so I gotta explain some more mythology here. So, if you remember right, the ravens, great ravens, were told way back, I think in Memories of Ice, that they feasted on the flesh of the Crippled God, and that's how they exist and have their magic. Well, that comes back here because they actually sacrifice themselves or return to the Crippled God to create an actual physical body, which allows for a physical manifestation of the Crippled God, in which they are able to put the heart as it is delivered to them on the altar by the Kachain Shamal. So now, with heart and physical body completely combined, the Crippled God physically manifests on this hill, and this altar. He's still chained, but now he is whole, at least. And this is when the Forkula Sail start their incredible assault upon this position. And this is the highest risk, because while now the Crippled God is physically manifest, he can be abused, and his power can be taken even more so than it could earlier have been. So this is probably the most dangerous point that anything has happened. The Malazans fight in an incredible way, impressing the Crippled God, and this is where he has a discussion where he says he doesn't understand their tenacity and their compassion, but he will make sure that their story is told, and he will write a Book of the Fallen. So we kind of hear that this whole perspective has been from the Crippled God's love and understanding for what, or trying to understand what the Malazans are doing. And there's this one great moment where between assaults, we see from the Forkula Sail perspective, well, first we see like someone tells a joke. I think it's Fiddler tells a joke, and people just start laughing, as humans often do in the face of tragedy and absurdity. We just have to laugh, and it is this echoing laughter that comes down the hill and chills the bones of the Forquillisail forces, and even loses some of the control they have over their soldiers, who start not wanting to fight. This is where the final stroke of the plan becomes clear. Earlier in the book, Tavor put her Otaratul sword in the sand on top of the altar, with Bashan, I believe his name is, the priest of Drek, also there. Now understand why she did that, because this draws the Otaratul dragon to the mound, and it is that dragon arriving that allows both the final destruction of the Forquillisail forces, but more importantly, that is what breaks the chains on the Crippled God and allows him to finally be released from this world. And you might be thinking, well, how do the bridge burners survive? And that is because Drek, as I mentioned, is also physically manifested and takes the brunt of the magical deadening effects of the Otaratul dragon, and that allows the heroes, especially Fiddler, to survive. The problem is still there, that the Otaratul dragon is still living and very dangerous and can destroy the world, and the manifestation of this dragon, Korobas, has started to bring forth Tiam, who is, again, this great force of chaos that will also destroy the world. And we actually see her in a literal tornado of dragons. Again, the imagery in this book is off the charts. So this tornado of dragons, you see in the middle of it these massive eyes as Tiam is being brought into the world, and this is where we see the final stroke of the Elder Gods and their wisdom and being on the side of this noble thing with the Crippled God, because Kerul, Mael show up and actually using the strength of the Crippled God, his power now for good, but in a sad way, they rechain the Otaratul dragon in a more merciful prison, it sounds like, than she was at before. Remember, Korobas was crucified for all of time before this. Now she is chained, it seems like, in a cave. This is, of course, a very difficult decision for the crippled and chained god to do to someone else, but it is what must be done, and Korobas actually is happy to do this rather than die. We get a little bit of Korobas's perspective, and Erikson does so much with so little there to make us feel for her as well. Thing that is done by Mael and Kerul allow her to leave so she doesn't destroy the world, and Tiam then no longer is being manifested and the dragons disperse, and the Crippled God is about to ascend to his followers, and at the last second, Cotillion literally stabs him in the back. We don't know exactly why. I think this is to release him from the physical form so that he can actually completely leave, but then the Crippled God is gone. This great pain and misery has been ended by the heroism of the Bone Hunters and those all attached to it, and it is a climax of climaxes. There's beautiful endings as well. We get some closure with Whiskey Jack and Corlat, which we haven't had in so long. A beautiful ending. We get great endings for Tak, who is finally accepted into the Bridge Burners as their ascendant form, protecting the Gate of Death. We have a great closure with Hood, who's now part of this undead Jagged clan, and this very funny ending. We had a huge happy ending for Fiddler, who I think is, after reading this book, he's now, I think, the main character. If we were going to say there's a main character, I think Fiddler is it, which I wouldn't have guessed in any other part of the series, but I think that's quite clear now that he was sort of the heart of it. He, Tavor, and Perrin. Maybe even not Ganos. But anyway, he ends up his days in Mala City, goes fishing every late morning, we see, because at night he goes to the special inn where only soldiers know about, plays his fiddle, and there's this young boy on the docks who says, "You're just a lazy old man, I'm gonna go be a great soldier." So it's reminiscent obviously of the prologue that we saw in Gardens of the Moon, except that boy was Ganos Perrin at that point. And Fiddler, of course, is also in that situation, and so he kind of smirks and says the world could always need more soldiers, as sort of an homage to the great thing that has been done throughout these books. And so he gets his happy ending. We also get a great happy ending for Crocus and Apsalar. We see that they are reunited, just sort of in a coastal region in peace. That is such a happy story. happy ending. Like I said, this ending is so satisfying because there's so much loss, so much pain. The Stormy and Gessler storyline, we lose people like Korab, who we've been with for a long time. A lot of sadness, but also a lot of happiness, and a lot of good comes out of things where we think are going to end up badly. It's so satisfying, but not in an easy way, in a hard way. We've earned this ending, and Erikson gives it to us. I love, love, love this book, and love, love, love the plot. Now let's get into some of the wider themes of the work as a whole. A big part of the collision and conflict in this book is the sins of humanity, is the sins that we commit against the world, against the earth, against each other, coming back upon humanity itself. And Forkel Assail want to destroy humanity as a whole. The wolves that eventually take over the Greyhelms are sort of stand-ins for the grievances of the physical earth itself. We also have the Talan Imas, specifically, actually I should say the Imas, who are still living with Udanas. And early on in the book, they lament that there's nowhere they can go where the destructive power of humans will not find them. And so a big part of this work is arrogance, the desire to bring everything under its control, the desire to rebound suffering one has caused to the world is key to humanity, and it allows us to gain mastery of our surroundings, but also in many ways to be destructive to each other, to the world, to all of these things. And so in many ways, the Forkel Assail is sort of the personification or a real metaphor of the world fighting back. But of course, that justice is also imperfect and overly bloody, as we are seen several times. And so what's the answer to this problem that Erikson gives? Because it's easy to critique without an answer. But in this case, the answer is even harder, and that is radical compassion. Once you're in the story, it's easy to see this whole theme come together, and you're all for it, narratively. But take a step back and think about what this means. Crippled God has done terrible things in this. Think back to Memories of Ice, the Teniscowry, the Jagged Tyrant, what he is forcing those people to do to cause as much pain as possible. Think what he did to Rulad in driving him crazy and using his craziness to twist the traditions of the Edur to cause pain and suffering in the Letheri Empire. Think of what he is doing with the Whirlwind and trying to create slaughter in a huge scale and succeeds at in 7 cities. All these things the Crippled God has a hand in. The answer to that, Erikson says, is not to simply destroy or kill the Crippled God, but to ask yourself, what is his position? Why is he doing this? How can we fix the pain this person has? How can we understand them and so have compassion on them? That is an unbelievable virtue that just about none of us in this world have and don't practice. And it will be affecting to you in the real world, in your real life, if you allow it to. Because how can it not, if you truly buy what Erikson is putting forth? I want to highlight one discussion, as I said, between Gessler and Stormy with Tool when they come together to talk about this very thing. Why are they fighting for the Crippled God? "We will fight for you," Onos Tulan said, and then he was silent, confused at seeing the effect his words had on these two men. This is Stormy and Gessler. "Have I distressed you?" Gessler shook his head. "No, you greatly relieve us, First Sword. It is not that, it's just..." "Now it's my turn to ask. Why?" "It is by our sacrifice, yours and mine," said Onos Tulan. "The pain of one life can be ended. If by our deaths this can be guided home, we will judge this a worthy cause." Gessler: "This Crippled God, he is a stranger to us all." And then Tool says this incredible sentence: "It is enough that in the place he calls home, he is no stranger." This is radical compassion, folks. This is, again, life-changing. This would be world-changing if we embrace this. If you embrace this, you can't be for the death penalty. If you're for this, your views on immigration, on whatever place you're in, completely changes. Challenges your view of racism, your view of privilege, your view of how you should treat people. Should change your view of economics. It should change how you view the poor. This radical compassion breaks down all kinds of barriers. And we need to dwell on this. There's a beautiful picture of Karsa right before he kills Fenrir. There is an old man, a cripple, who is just dying outside of the temple that he's about to go to. And this man is about to die, and Karsa just sits with him while he dies. This is Karsa, the man who has pillaged and raped, done awful things. He is prideful, talks about things being witnessed, all of these things. But he has learned compassion to a degree where he will stop before he does his ultimate mission to give this moment of goodness to this man who is passing away. And it's incredibly challenging. That's how we should live our lives, compassionately in all aspects. And that is what Erikson is calling us to do through this epic fantasy tale, and it is incredible. And this living will call us to great sacrifices. That's also a huge point in this, sacrifices. Toole talked about it in that. Stormy and Gessler obviously give their lives. Many of the bone hunters give their lives. And this sacrifice is not just for us, and we perhaps will not even gain the rewards of this sort of living, but for the future of our race, the future of our people. And that is why Erikson continually, again and again, emphasizes children and sacrificing for the good of children. The snake is a huge example of this. I mentioned early on, when they find the bone hunters, the reflection of the compassion of the bow hunter is seen that at this point they are literally drinking their own piss because they are out of water. And yet, with the little water that they do have, when they find the snake, there's this beautiful scene where Fiddler and his scouts, without a moment's hesitation, take their canteens and give them to these children. I think it's Bedell who says, this is not like the others, or these are not like the others. This self-sacrificial love. And many bone hunters die of thirst, and yet they're willing to give water to these children. And that is contrasted all throughout the work of how other people treat children, whether it's Phyllis the Younger, who's terribly abused, the death of the 1,000 children who are crucified way back in Deadhouse Gates, Toole's children who are used as pawns by different people way back in Deadhouse Gates, right? That quote, children are dying. All of history can be boiled down to these 3 words. This need to fight for the future. And I want to highlight 2 passages that are just beautiful and challenging in this respect. First, this is in chapter 14 at the very beginning. This is Bedell thinking this: I am as true as anything you have ever seen, a dying child abandoned by the world. And I say this, there's nothing truer, nothing. And then all of this is summed up at the very end. This is chapter 24, I think the last chapter in the whole thing. It is not enough to wish for a better world for the children. It is not enough to shield them with ease and comfort. If we do not sacrifice for our own ease, our own comfort, to make the future's world a better one, then we curse our own children. We leave them a misery they do not deserve. We leave them a host of lessons unlearned. The true sense of motherhood, of fatherhood, of being an adult in this world is to sacrifice our own comfort for the comfort of the future. We see that so lacking in our world today, and Erikson's Book of the Fallen is a tome to that, and it cannot get more challenging than that. This is an epic story, fantastic characters, fantastic plot points, twists. The world is incredible, but at the heart of all this, the reason this is my favorite fantasy of all time is that it challenges more than anything else. This is not just a simple good versus evil story. This is a compassion versus inaction story. Compassion versus ignorance. Compassion versus selfishness story. And that is a much more complicated, hard thing to communicate, and Erikson does it. This is incredible. The Crippled God gets from me a perfect 10 out of 10. I love this book. I love this series. I don't mean this lightly when I say this is a masterpiece. Every inch of it. Thank you so much, Steven Erikson, for writing it. Thank you guys out there who are reading it with me and support it and tell other people about it, because it is truly phenomenal. I think not only is it the best fantasy I've ever read, it has, as I said, the chance to change the world if we truly take its lessons to heart. Love, love, love it. Please let me know your thoughts of the Malazan book of the Fallen as a whole, about the Crippled God. Feel free to leave spoilers all over the place, point out things that I missed or cool moments, talk about this book. It is so great. I love it so much. Thank you guys for being with me on this journey. As always, first in, last out.